She was dragged out in handcuffs, her dignity scraping the ground behind her. Cameras watched, strangers whispered, and not one soul stepped forward, not one. A black woman, dressed in honor and integrity, treated like a criminal in front of the world, and all because they never stopped to ask who she was. They saw her skin, not her story. But the truth? The truth was waiting, and when it came, it shattered everything they thought they knew. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The night had a somber chill that wrapped around the city like a heavy, damp cloak. Rain fell in steady, relentless sheets, turning the streets into mirror-like pools that reflected the neon glow of distant street lamps. In the midst of the downpour, the courthouse stood as a lone fortress of justice, its stone facade glistening with rainwater and age-old secrets. This ancient building, with its high, arched windows and ivy-clad walls, was not just a symbol of law. It was a silent witness to countless stories of hope, struggle, and heartbreak. Inside the courthouse, in a small, dimly lit office, Charlotte sat at her desk, the only light coming from a single lamp that threw gentle shadows across piles of legal files and personal mementos. As Chief Justice, Charlotte was known for her unwavering commitment to the truth and a deep sense of fairness. Yet tonight, even the steadfastness that had defined her career seemed to waver under the weight of the coming storm. Charlotte's eyes, dark and reflective, scanned a set of case files with a precision that belied the turmoil within her heart. She was not a woman who shied away from hard truths. She had built her reputation on the foundation of honesty and a relentless pursuit of justice. But the cases before her were not just legal battles. They were windows into the lives of people who had suffered at the hands of an unjust system. Each file told a story of despair, of voices silenced by prejudice, and of the delicate hope that justice might one day prevail. A soft knock at the door pulled Charlotte from her thoughts. She looked up to see Michael, her trusted aide, standing in the doorway with an expression that mingled concern and urgency. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the storm outside, never failed to ground her in moments of doubt. "Charlotte," he said in a quiet, steady tone, "there is someone here to see you. He insists it's urgent." Michael's words carried a weight that Charlotte could not ignore. Setting aside the files, she rose and smoothed the fabric of her modest but elegant blazer. She moved toward the door, each step echoing on the polished floor, as if marking the rhythm of an inevitable confrontation. The hallway beyond was narrow and lined with portraits of past judges and legal luminaries, their eyes seeming to follow her with silent expectations of honor and duty. When the door opened, a tall, gaunt man in a dark suit stood before her. His face was drawn, his eyes a mixture of contrition and fear. "Justice Charlotte," he began, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of his emotions. "I have come to beg your forgiveness." His words were delivered with a trembling intensity, as though he bore the sins of 1,000 transgressions on his shoulders. Charlotte's expression hardened for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition and regret crossing her features. She knew this man well. He was none other than Edward, once a pillar of the institution she had strived to protect, now a man broken by the corruption that had infiltrated even the highest echelons of power. His plea for forgiveness was not just a personal request, it was the echo of a system built on ideals that had been slowly eroded by prejudice and unchecked authority. Yet in that moment, even as the rain drummed a steady beat on the courthouse windows, a deeper conflict brewed beneath the surface. The whispers of injustice, of dark forces at work in the city's underbelly, began to seep into Charlotte's thoughts. For years, she had fought tirelessly against an insidious network of racism and corruption that sought to undermine the very essence of justice. Edward's presence was a painful reminder of how far that rot had spread. His desperate plea clashed with the hard reality that forgiveness might come too late for many, and that redemption was a luxury not always granted by fate. The conversation that followed was hushed yet intense. Edward recounted his errors with a candor that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "I have seen what our system has become," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. "I have witnessed men in uniform, Men who claim to protect and serve, using their power to target and oppress, to silence those who dare to speak the truth. His eyes darted nervously, as if expecting the shadows themselves to rise and denounce him for his transgressions. Charlotte listened, her heart a mix of sorrow and steely resolve. She had long known that the struggle for justice was far from over, and that the very institutions meant to safeguard it were not immune to the darkness of human fallibility. "Edward," she said softly, "the road to redemption is paved with truth and sacrifice. But sometimes the price of our past sins is far too high for forgiveness to erase." Outside, the storm grew fiercer, and the courthouse trembled under the force of the winds. In that charged silence, a sense of foreboding settled over the room, a silent warning that the conflicts of the night were only the beginning of a larger, more dangerous battle. Charlotte's mind raced with memories of previous trials, of cases where the oppressed had cried out for justice and been met with indifference or cruelty. Every memory was a stark reminder of her duty to uphold the law, even as it revealed the stark imperfections of a system mired in prejudice. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of another visitor, a young lawyer named Benjamin, whose eyes shone with determination despite the evident exhaustion of sleepless nights spent defending those on the fringes of society. Benjamin had become Charlotte's most reliable ally, a beacon of hope amid the encroaching darkness. "Chief Justice Charlotte," he began, his tone respectful yet urgent, "there is growing unrest in the city. People are starting to question the integrity of our law enforcement. There are whispers that the police are not just biased, but are actively targeting those who challenge their authority." His words resonated with a raw truth that both alarmed and energized Charlotte. In that moment, the quiet office transformed into a microcosm of the larger world, a world where every act of injustice was a crack in the foundation of society. Charlotte looked at Benjamin, seeing in his earnest eyes the spark of a new revolution, one that demanded accountability and change. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the promise of upheaval and the bitter taste of betrayal. As the clock ticked away, each second echoing like a drumbeat in the night, Charlotte felt the burden of her responsibility settle more heavily upon her shoulders. She knew that her decisions in the coming days would not only determine the fate of those who sought justice, but would also redefine her own legacy. Tonight, in the flickering lamplight and the shadow of storm clouds, the seeds of conflict had been sown, a conflict that would test the very limits of her resolve, challenge the integrity of those around her, and force the hidden truths of the system into the harsh light of day. The rain continued to fall, relentless and unforgiving, as if to cleanse the city of its sins. And in that moment, standing at the crossroads of personal redemption and systemic decay, Charlotte understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with peril. Yet, with every fiber of her being, she was determined to fight for a future where justice was not a privilege of the powerful, but a right for all. The storm had finally eased into a heavy drizzle, and the courthouse corridors, once echoing with the tempest's fury, now whispered with secrets of the night. Charlotte had barely settled back into the solitude of her office when an unsettling knock shattered the fragile calm. Her heart skipped, echoing the remnants of the earlier turmoil, as she opened the door to reveal a shadowed figure cloaked in an overcoat. The stranger's face was obscured by a low-brimmed hat, and his eyes, hidden in the dim light, flickered with urgency. "Chief Justice Charlotte," he began, his voice low and trembling, "I apologize for this late intrusion, but you must hear me out." His tone carried a blend of fear and determination that struck a chord deep within her. In that moment, something in his demeanor hinted at a knowledge that could disrupt the delicate balance of her world. Before she could invite him in, the stranger extended a small envelope sealed with an unfamiliar insignia and pressed it into her hand. "This," he whispered, "contains the truth about what has been hidden for far too long. It's about the very forces that have led to the rot infecting our institutions." Without waiting for an answer, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Charlotte with a heart pounding in a dissonant rhythm of dread and curiosity. Charlotte retreated to the solitude of her desk, The envelope a stark anomaly against the familiar clutter of legal files. With hesitant fingers, she broke the seal, revealing a series of typed documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. The papers detailed disturbing evidence, clandestine meetings between high-ranking police officers and influential political figures, covert memos filled with coded language that alluded to discriminatory practices, and even witness statements hinting at orchestrated arrests of innocent citizens. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a grainy image of a police convoy, its vehicles marked with insignia known to be tied to a notorious unit infamous for its racist undertones. As she absorbed the weight of the information, Charlotte felt a shiver of foreboding. The documents painted a picture of a vast conspiracy, a network of corruption where the law, meant to protect the vulnerable, was instead weaponized against them. It was as if a dark hand had been steering the wheels of justice, using fear and prejudice to manipulate outcomes. The evidence not only implicated some of the very individuals she had trusted, but it also hinted at a betrayal that cut even deeper than she could have imagined. Her thoughts spiraled back to the earlier conversation with Edward, whose desperate plea had left a lingering sense of sorrow and regret. Was his visit connected to this ominous revelation? Could his admission of past errors be a desperate attempt to warn her, or was it part of a larger, more insidious game? As doubts and fears intermingled, Charlotte's mind raced. Each detail in the documents seemed to pull her further into a labyrinth of secrets and hidden agendas, a world where loyalty was as fragile as the paper in her trembling hands. The silence of the office was punctuated by the soft hum of a nearby air conditioner and the occasional distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. In that quiet, every small noise was amplified, each whisper of the wind through the window a reminder of the vulnerability of truth in a city built on lies. The evidence before her was not only damning, it was a ticking time bomb waiting to ignite the central conflict that had long been smoldering beneath the surface of the justice system. Determined to uncover the full extent of the betrayal, Charlotte decided to reach out to Benjamin, whose steadfast dedication to justice had always provided her with clarity amid the chaos. Over a discreet phone call in the dead of night, she shared the contents of the envelope, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Benjamin listened intently, his words measured and cautious. "This is dangerous, Charlotte," he warned, the gravity in his tone unmistakable. "If what you're saying is true, then we're dealing with a conspiracy that goes far beyond a few corrupt officers. It's systemic, and if someone is trying to expose it, then there are others who will stop at nothing to keep it hidden." His words confirmed her deepest suspicions. The documents hinted not only at racist practices within the police force, but also at a high-level cover-up, implicating figures who were supposed to be the stalwarts of justice. Each revelation was like a chisel striking at the very foundation of the trust that society had placed in its institutions. Charlotte's mind filled with images of dark meetings, backroom deals, and whispered conversations in smoke-filled rooms. It was a betrayal that reached into the heart of everything she had fought for all her life. Yet amid the turmoil, a nagging thought persisted. Who had sent her this information and why? The mysterious stranger's identity remained shrouded in uncertainty, and the possibility of a double cross loomed large. Had she been manipulated into unearthing secrets that would destabilize her own authority? The risk of falling prey to another betrayal was palpable. In that dimly lit moment, Charlotte felt as if she were standing at the edge of an abyss, one misstep away from being consumed by the darkness she sought to expose. As the night deepened, Charlotte resolved to act. She meticulously organized the documents, determined to cross-reference every detail and verify the authenticity of the evidence. The office, once a sanctuary of order and routine, had transformed into a command center for an impending battle against hidden forces of injustice. Every case file on her desk now took on a new urgency, each a potential piece in a puzzle that could either reform the system or shatter it beyond repair. Outside, the city's quiet hum was punctuated by distant sirens, a subtle reminder that the forces at work were already stirring. In the back of her mind, Charlotte could not shake the feeling that this was merely the first salvo in a war she had no choice but to fight. The revelation was clear. The corruption was deep-rooted, the betrayal closer than she had ever imagined. With each passing minute, the sense of isolation grew, not just as a solitary keeper of the law, but as a lone warrior standing against a tide of moral decay. The night wore on, and the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like dark fingers across the room. In that quiet, reflective moment, Charlotte's resolve hardened. She knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but the call to justice was stronger than any fear. The documents were both a warning and a promise that the truth, however buried, would someday see the light. And so, with a determined heart and a mind sharpened by the gravity of the situation, Charlotte vowed to uncover the full extent of the betrayal, even if it meant facing enemies within her own ranks. The envelope, once a simple bundle of paper and ink, had now become the catalyst for a profound transformation. It shattered the illusion of a system that had long maintained a fragile semblance of order, exposing instead a web of deceit, racism, and collusion. In that pivotal moment, the inciting incident was clear. Charlotte's life, her legacy, and the very future of justice in the city were now inextricably linked to a truth that was as dangerous as it was necessary. As the sun rose higher, casting its pale light over the city, Charlotte stood by her window, staring out at the awakening world with a mixture of sorrow and fierce determination. The battle lines had been drawn, and the forces of corruption and betrayal were mobilizing in ways she could only begin to imagine. Yet, with every piece of evidence and every whispered warning, Charlotte's commitment to justice burned brighter. In the silence of that early morning, she took her first step into a future defined by truth, even if that truth came at the cost of everything she had ever known. Charlotte sat at the long, polished table in the quiet meeting room of the courthouse, her gaze fixed on the reflection of her own troubled eyes in the glass vase, holding a single rose. The soft hum of the overhead light created a gentle backdrop to an atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Across from her, Benjamin and Edward sat in a tentative semicircle, each bearing the weight of their secrets. The room, though simple in design, was charged with conflicting emotions and unresolved conflicts that had quietly festered over time. Benjamin broke the silence first. "Charlotte, there's something I need to discuss," he said, his voice wavering between determination and hesitation. "Ever since the incident with the documents, I've felt that there are layers here that we haven't yet uncovered." His eyes met Charlotte's with a blend of loyalty and concern, as if he were trying to gauge whether she felt the same internal struggle. Charlotte's response was measured, though the vulnerability in her tone was unmistakable. "I have been wrestling with it, Benjamin. Every piece of evidence hints at betrayals that run deeper than a few corrupt individuals. It forces me to question everything I thought was certain about our system." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. "I wonder if the true enemy might be closer to home than we ever suspected." Edward shifted in his seat, his face etched with regret. "I have my own demons, Charlotte," he admitted softly. "I once believed in the purity of the institutions we served. But over time, I realized that I was complicit in an agenda that had far darker intentions. I have tried to make amends, but I fear my past actions have stained every part of who I am." Benjamin leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he searched Edward's face. "Edward, your confession earlier wasn't just about seeking forgiveness, was it? There's more you're not saying." The subtle accusation in Benjamin's voice cut through the quiet, sparking a moment of raw honesty. Edward's gaze dropped to his hands, trembling slightly. "I was afraid," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Afraid of what might happen if the truth came out, afraid that my own choices would be used against me. I thought I could protect those I care about by keeping certain secrets hidden. But now, as I see the mounting evidence, I realize that the cost of silence has been far too high." Charlotte's mind churned with conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of betrayal by those who had once been her allies. On the other, a deep-seated understanding of the complexities that had led them to this point. Benjamin, you and I have fought side by side for justice. And yet, every day, I see that, even within our ranks, there are fractures that could crumble the entire foundation we stand upon. She paused, glancing at Edward. Edward, your admission today, while painful, is a necessary step toward redemption. But we must ask ourselves, what is the true cost of our inaction? Benjamin exhaled slowly. It's not just about us anymore, he replied. It's about every person who has suffered at the hands of a system that should have protected them. I have spoken with many in the community, their pain, their loss. It echoes in every decision we make. The corruption we're up against isn't a mere aberration. It's woven into the fabric of the institutions we've trusted. As the conversation continued, the room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in with every confession and counteraccusation. Charlotte's internal thoughts raced like a storm. She recalled her early days as Chief Justice, filled with hope and a clear vision for reform. Yet over time, the pressures of power and the weight of the law had transformed her once clear ideals into a battleground of competing loyalties and hidden agendas. At that moment, a quiet knock at the door pulled their attention. A young lawyer named Daniel entered, his face a mix of determination and apprehension. I apologize for interrupting, he said, his voice earnest. But I have new information that might change our perspective on the matter at hand. Daniel set down a thin file on the table, its contents promising to reveal details that could shift the balance of power. Charlotte carefully opened the file and scanned its pages. It contained records of covert meetings, secret communications, and financial transactions that implicated not only low-level operatives, but also some of the very individuals they had all trusted. The evidence was damning and carried a silent accusation against the entire system. The file hinted at a broader conspiracy, one that went beyond personal failings and touched on a systemic abuse of power that had left deep scars on the community. Benjamin's eyes widened as he took in the information. This is exactly what I feared, he said, his voice a mix of sorrow and resolve. It confirms that the rot isn't isolated, it's a plague that has seeped into every corner of our system. His hand trembled slightly as he closed the file, as if the weight of the revelations was too much to bear. Edward's expression darkened further, the flicker of his previous remorse now overshadowed by a dawning realization. I have been part of this decay, he murmured, his voice heavy with guilt. I was blind to the consequences of my actions. In my attempt to shield myself from the repercussions, I ended up contributing to a betrayal that might one day destroy everything we hold dear. Charlotte, with her gaze fixed on the file, felt an overwhelming surge of conflicting emotions. The familiar resolve of her early days battled with the crushing disappointment of the present reality. We are at a crossroads, she declared, her voice firm yet laced with melancholy. We can no longer allow ourselves to be divided by our past mistakes. Instead, we must unite to uncover every hidden secret, every unspoken betrayal, and rebuild the system from its very foundations. Benjamin nodded slowly, the determination in his eyes shining through despite the despair. We have to be honest with ourselves and with the people who depend on us for justice. This fight isn't just about exposing corruption, it's about healing the deep wounds that have been inflicted on our community. And that starts with acknowledging the vulnerabilities in our own hearts. The room fell silent for a moment as each of them grappled with the enormity of the situation. In that silence, the unspoken truths between them were laid bare. Each person was haunted by their own past, driven by a desperate need for redemption, and bound by a common desire to make things right. Breaking the silence, Charlotte looked directly at Edward. You once told me that you believed in the system. What happened, Edward? How did we reach this point where the very people meant to serve and protect have become instruments of oppression? Her question was not an accusation, but a plea for understanding, a call to confront the painful reality of their shared history. Edward's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he replied, I was deceived by promises of loyalty and power. I allowed my ambition to cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I betrayed the very ideals I once held sacred. I see now that every compromise, every half-hearted stand has led us here. Daniel, who had been quietly observing, interjected with a note of urgency. This is more than just personal failure, it's a failure of the system. And while each of us must confront our own shortcomings, we also have a duty to dismantle the forces that have corrupted our institutions. His words echoed the sentiment that had been building in the room, a shared commitment to face the darkness head-on, even if it meant unearthing uncomfortable truths about themselves. As the meeting drew to a close, the three of them sat in a fragile silence, each lost in their own introspection. The bonds between them were tested by the weight of the past, yet in that moment, a new understanding began to take root. They were no longer simply individuals fighting for justice, they were parts of a larger whole, united by a common purpose. Charlotte finally broke the silence, her voice resolute, yet tender. We must move forward together. Our personal failings do not define us, but our choices from this point on will. Let us commit to truth, no matter how painful it may be. And in doing so, perhaps we can finally heal the wounds of our past and forge a future built on genuine justice. The words hung in the air like a solemn promise, a commitment to stand united against the corruption that threatened to destroy them all. In that room, the dynamics of trust, betrayal, and redemption intertwined, setting the stage for the unfolding drama that would challenge not only their professional lives, but the very core of their identities. Charlotte sat in the quiet solitude of her study, the soft murmur of the early morning barely audible beneath the heavy silence that had settled over the courthouse. The documents from the mysterious envelope lay scattered before her like shards of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a part of a truth she had yet to fully grasp. The weight of the evidence pressed down on her, and her thoughts were a tumult of questions and suspicions. She had spent countless nights chasing elusive leads, piecing together fragments of corruption and betrayal. Yet, despite her best efforts, a crucial detail had always evaded her grasp until now. Late that night, as the rain began to soften into a steady drizzle outside, Charlotte reviewed the documents with renewed determination. The photographs, memos, and transcripts painted a damning picture of collusion between influential figures and corrupt elements within the police force. But amidst the familiar names and insignia, one anomaly caught her eye, a series of coded messages that repeatedly referenced a name she had long considered a steadfast ally, Benjamin. The discovery sent a chill down her spine, for Benjamin had been more than a trusted colleague. He was a confidant, a loyal friend who had stood by her side through every trial. As she scrutinized the coded notes, Charlotte's mind raced through every interaction they had shared. The late-night meetings, the whispered discussions in the quiet corners of the courthouse, and the earnest promises of reform. All suddenly took on a different hue. Could it be that the man who had so faithfully supported her crusade against injustice was harboring secrets of his own? The thought was both inconceivable and deeply painful. Unable to shake her growing unease, Charlotte decided that she must confront Benjamin directly. She arranged to meet him at a secluded corner of the courthouse, a small room they had often used for private discussions when the pressures of their work became overwhelming. As she waited, the dim light of the single overhead lamp cast long shadows on the walls, echoing the dark thoughts that had taken root in her heart. Benjamin arrived promptly, his expression calm and collected as he greeted her with a warm smile that did little to quell the storm brewing inside her. "Charlotte, it's good to see you," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm in the midst of her inner turmoil. Yet as he stepped closer, she could not help but notice a fleeting hesitation in his eyes, a momentary spark of something she could neither place nor dismiss. "Benjamin," she began, her tone measured yet laced with an undercurrent of accusation, "I've been reviewing some documents. There are references to your name in connection with activities I never imagined you would be involved in." Her voice wavered as she placed the coded messages before him, the paper trembling slightly in her grasp. "Explain this to me." For a long moment, Benjamin's eyes searched hers, as if he were weighing the cost of truth against the burden of silence. Finally, his expression hardened, and he leaned back against the cool wall, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Charlotte, there are things you don't know, things I was forced to do. I never meant to betray you or the cause we believe in." His words were laden with regret and desperation, and for a heartbeat, Charlotte saw in his face the same torment that now churned within her. He continued, his tone tinged with bitterness. "I was recruited long before we even met. They promised me safety for my family, security in a system that was already crumbling from within. I believed I could play both sides, that I could use the trust you placed in me to protect what was left of our ideals. But as the stakes grew higher, the line between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. His confession spilled out in a torrent of anguish, each word a dagger to the trust that had bound them together. Charlotte's heart pounded fiercely as the truth unraveled before her. She remembered the long hours they had spent discussing the future of justice, the shared visions of a better system free of corruption. Now, the man who had inspired that vision was revealing a betrayal so profound that it threatened to undo everything she had fought for. "You were with them all along?" she demanded, her voice trembling with both sorrow and fury. "How could you justify using our cause as a shield for your own survival?" Benjamin's eyes glistened with tears that he could no longer hide. "I never chose this path lightly," he whispered. "Every decision, every compromise was made under the shadow of fear. I was trapped in a web spun by forces far more powerful than either of us could have imagined. And before I knew it, my actions had become entangled with theirs, fueling the very corruption I swore to fight." His confession was raw and unfiltered, a stark admission of complicity that left Charlotte reeling. The revelation shifted the landscape of Charlotte's world, her internal equilibrium shattering as she grappled with the duality of her closest ally. The documents had painted a portrait of systemic decay, but now the personal betrayal cut deeper than any institutional corruption. Benjamin's involvement wasn't merely an error in judgment, it was a fundamental fracture in the moral foundation on which she had built her career. As the silence stretched between them, Charlotte's mind raced with the implications of this betrayal. How many more secrets had Benjamin harbored? Had his actions been a desperate bid for self-preservation? Or was there a more sinister motive at play? Every memory they shared, every moment of camaraderie, was now tainted by the realization that trust had been compromised in the most intimate of ways. "I trusted you," Charlotte said, her voice breaking with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "All these years, I believed that we were fighting the same battle, fighting for a future where justice was not just a word, but a living, breathing reality. And now it seems that while I was busy holding onto my principles, you were sliding into a darkness I can hardly comprehend." Benjamin reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, as if to bridge the gulf that had suddenly yawned wide. "Charlotte, I am sorry," he pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine remorse. "I did what I had to do to protect those I love. I thought I could control the situation, that I could eventually find a way to make amends for my choices. But the moment I stepped into that role, I became entangled in a web of deceit that I can't escape from. Every decision I made was a calculated risk, and now I fear that the cost of those risks may be more than I can bear." Her eyes narrowed as she absorbed his words, the initial shock slowly giving way to a cold, measured resolve. Charlotte realized that this betrayal was not an isolated misstep, it was a symptom of a much deeper malaise that had infected the very institutions they had both dedicated their lives to. The betrayal had not come from an external enemy alone, it had emerged from within, tearing at the fabric of the trust that was essential for any hope of reform. In that charged moment, Charlotte's mind reeled with images of past conversations and fleeting expressions, all hinting at a hidden agenda she had never fully recognized. The betrayal was a twist that redefined her journey, casting a long shadow over every subsequent decision. With Benjamin's revelation, The path ahead was no longer a clear pursuit of justice, it was a labyrinth of moral ambiguity and perilous choices where every step could lead to further loss. As the room grew colder and the early dawn light began to filter through the heavy curtains, Charlotte felt the enormity of her situation settle over her like a shroud. She stood slowly, the documents and Benjamin's confession echoing in her mind, and knew that this revelation would alter the course of her quest. The trust that had once been the cornerstone of her alliance was now shattered, and in its place lay a void filled with questions and uncertainty. "I must reconsider everything," Charlotte murmured, her voice resolute despite the tremor of pain. "The fight for justice is far more complicated than I ever imagined. I need to uncover every hidden truth, even if it means facing the betrayals that lurk within our own ranks." Her determination was tempered by a deep sorrow, the betrayal not just a professional setback, but a personal wound that cut to the very core of her being. Benjamin bowed his head, his remorse palpable. "I understand," he said softly, "and I am prepared to face the consequences of my actions. I never wanted to become the enemy, but I realize now that in trying to protect what I held dear, I lost sight of what truly mattered." The gravity of his words hung in the air, mingling with the early morning silence as Charlotte turned away, her thoughts a maelstrom of pain, anger, and reluctant understanding. The betrayal had not only shifted her understanding of the battle they were fighting, it had fundamentally altered the relationships that had once been her sanctuary. As the day broke fully, casting stark light on the remnants of darkness that had plagued the night, Charlotte knew that the path forward would demand sacrifices and hard truths. The journey was no longer just about dismantling corruption. It was about reconciling the fractures within her own circle, even if the truth threatened to tear everything apart. The morning light brought no relief from the storm of doubt raging within Charlotte. The revelation of Benjamin's betrayal had shaken the foundation of her resolve, and as she stepped out of the courthouse, the chill in the air mirrored the cold dread that had settled in her bones. The city, with its bustling streets and huddled figures under umbrellas, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of corruption and treachery swirling beneath its surface. Yet every passerby, every siren in the distance, whispered of a conflict that was rapidly escalating beyond her control. Charlotte's internal turmoil was compounded by the harsh reality of the external world. The documents, now safely hidden in a secure drawer of her office, had not only exposed the rot within the police force, but also hinted at a planned crackdown on dissenters. Rumors had been circulating, quiet murmurs that a faction within the law enforcement was mobilizing, determined to silence any voices of reform. And now, with Benjamin's secret laid bare, every step Charlotte took was shadowed by the fear that the very system she sought to uphold might be rigged against her. Later that afternoon, as Charlotte prepared for an emergency meeting with a select group of trusted colleagues, a heavy sense of foreboding gripped her. The meeting room, usually a space of rational debate and careful planning, now felt like the epicenter of an imminent storm. The table was set with steaming cups of coffee and scattered papers, but the usual hum of hopeful collaboration was replaced by an undercurrent of anxious whispers and cautious glances. "Charlotte," began Daniel, his voice uncharacteristically low, "there's been an incident on the east side. A protest turned violent. Apparently, the police were involved in an aggressive sweep that left several people injured." His words reverberated in the small room, adding another layer of urgency to an already volatile situation. Benjamin, sitting at the far end, avoided eye contact. His presence, once a pillar of trust, now radiated a silent tension that was hard to ignore. "Do we know who authorized the operation?" he asked, his tone deliberately neutral, yet it carried a subtle edge that hinted at his inner conflict. Charlotte's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the unfolding chaos with the revelations of betrayal. "It's too early to be sure," she replied cautiously. "But if the allegations are true, this could be the work of those who have long manipulated our system from the shadows." Her words were measured, yet beneath them pulsed a deep-seated fear that every decision made now could ignite a conflagration that might engulf not only her career, but the entire community she had sworn to protect. The room fell silent as each person grappled with the weight of the situation. For Charlotte, the dual challenge was brutal. Externally, a force was mobilizing to enforce a draconian order, and internally her closest ally had become an unwitting agent of that same order. The betrayal had shattered her trust, leaving behind an unsettling void that threatened to undermine every plan she had meticulously crafted. As the meeting progressed, a barrage of phone calls and urgent messages punctuated the strained silence. A local reporter had somehow gotten wind of the protests, and his questions about police brutality were now weaving a narrative of dissent that Charlotte feared might spiral out of control. In a brief moment of private reflection, she wondered if the pursuit of justice might sometimes demand sacrifices that no one was truly prepared to make. Every choice she now faced was a delicate balance between upholding the law and preserving the fragile hope for reform. After the meeting, Charlotte found herself alone in her office, the dim light of dusk filtering through the tall windows. She sat at her desk, the remnants of the earlier discussions echoing in her mind like ghostly admonitions. The envelope of documents lay before her, a grim reminder that every hidden secret had the potential to become a destructive force. Her eyes lingered on a particular line in one of the memos, a coded reference to Operation Resolve, a project that until now had been shrouded in mystery. The implications were staggering. This was no isolated instance of corruption, but a well-orchestrated plan that could reshape the very nature of the justice system. In that solitary moment, Charlotte was besieged by an internal dilemma that threatened to tear her apart. Should she confront the full scope of this conspiracy head-on, risking the collapse of the fragile alliances she had built, or should she attempt a more measured approach, keeping the dangerous truth hidden until she could muster irrefutable evidence? The answer was not clear, and the choice itself became a crucible in which her convictions were tested. The betrayal by Benjamin had not only shaken her trust in those around her, but had also forced her to question whether her unwavering pursuit of justice was worth the personal cost. Her introspection was interrupted by a knock at the door. Benjamin entered once more, his eyes downcast, as if weighed down by the burden of his own guilt. "Charlotte," he began softly, "I know I've jeopardized everything. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to help fix this, if you'll let me." His words were heavy with regret, and for a fleeting moment, Charlotte considered the possibility of redemption. Yet the scars of betrayal ran too deep. His voice, though earnest, carried a familiar tone of self-preservation that had led him down this treacherous path. "Benjamin," she said quietly, her voice a mix of sorrow and steely determination, "every step we take now must be measured, because the cost of failure is far too high. I need to know that I can trust you with the truth, everything, without holding back any more secrets." The challenge in her tone was not merely a demand for loyalty, but a plea for accountability, a desperate attempt to salvage a bond that had once been unbreakable. Benjamin hesitated, his eyes reflecting the inner turmoil of a man caught between loyalty and survival. "I understand," he replied, his voice trembling. "I'll do everything in my power to prove that I'm on your side. I have more information, details about Operation Resolve that I haven't shared yet. It might be the key to dismantling the entire network that's been pulling the strings." His words, while offering a glimmer of hope, also deepened the tension that coiled around them like a serpent. Charlotte sensed that the stakes were escalating rapidly. Outside, the city was descending into chaos, with protesters gathering and whispers of an impending crackdown echoing through the streets. Every moment, every decision held the potential to ignite a spark that could either bring about a long-awaited reckoning or plunge the community into irreversible turmoil. The weight of her responsibilities pressed upon her, and she knew that the coming days would test the very limits of her resolve and the moral compass of everyone involved. In that twilight of uncertainty, Charlotte made a silent vow to herself to pursue the truth relentlessly, no matter how many alliances would crumble along the way, and to ensure that the pursuit of justice never became a tool for personal or institutional power. As the night deepened, the sound of distant sirens and the murmurs of the restless city served as a stark reminder that the battle was far from over. The escalating tension was not just a manifestation of external challenges, but also the internal scars of betrayal, regret, and the unyielding desire to rebuild what had been so devastatingly broken. The choices before her were daunting, and every heartbeat was a countdown to a confrontation that would leave no one unchanged. With determination hardening her resolve, Charlotte prepared herself for the next phase of this dangerous game, where the line between right and wrong was blurred by the very human complexities of fear, love, and the unquenchable thirst for justice. Charlotte stood in the grand, echoing hall of the courthouse, where the late afternoon light struggled to break through the heavy, bruised clouds outside. The tension in the air was almost tangible, a mixture of fear and anticipation that clung to every stone and every whispered breath. Today was the day when every secret would be forced into the open, when the carefully built facade of the corrupt system would finally shatter under the weight of truth. A sharp knock echoed through the hall, and in walked a contingent of uniformed officers, their expressions hard and resolute. At their head was Captain Harris, a man whose icy glare had become synonymous with the brutal methods of the force. His eyes locked with Charlotte's, and in that silent exchange lay a challenge as clear as day. "Chief Justice Charlotte," he announced in a clipped tone, "you are under arrest for inciting unrest and for obstructing investigations." The words fell like a hammer, each syllable striking the pillars of justice that she had spent a lifetime defending. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Charlotte's heart pounded like a drum, and her mind raced through every moment that had led her to this point. She thought of the secret documents, the betrayal of her closest ally Benjamin, and the mounting evidence of a conspiracy that had poisoned the institution from within. She remembered the whispered confessions, the painful admissions, and the stark realization that the enemy was not always cloaked in uniform. Now, the confrontation was here, and she had to face the full, brutal truth. "Captain Harris," Charlotte replied steadily, her voice echoing in the vast hall, "you accuse me of crimes that are the very symptoms of a broken system. I stand here not as a criminal, but as the guardian of a truth that must be known." Her words, measured and resolute, cut through the murmurs of the assembled crowd of onlookers and staff who had gathered in shock. The officers moved in, but before they could reach her, Benjamin stepped forward from the crowd. His face, lined with regret and desperation, was illuminated by the flickering lights of the hall. "Charlotte, wait," he pleaded, his voice trembling as he tried to hold back the tide of his emotions. "There is more to this than you know. I have information that can clear your name and expose those truly responsible for this corruption." His admission, laced with sorrow and a desperate need for redemption, hung in the air like a fragile promise. But before Charlotte could respond, a clatter echoed from behind the group. Edward, who had been silent until now, emerged with an envelope clutched in his shaking hands. "Charlotte," he called out, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and determination, "this contains the final piece of evidence, Operation Resolve in its entirety. It names the true culprits, those who set you up from the start." His eyes, wide with both hope and regret, met Charlotte's. In that moment, all the weight of past betrayals and hidden schemes bore down on her. The documents he offered were a chance to clear her name, but also a reminder of how deep the rot ran. Captain Harris narrowed his eyes as he snatched the envelope from Edward's hands. "What is this?" he demanded, scanning the pages hurriedly. The evidence, a labyrinth of transactions, covert meetings, and coded communications, laid bare the orchestrated network of corruption that had used the very institutions meant to protect the people. It was a revelation that shook the room to its core. The murmurs of the onlookers grew louder, and suddenly the courthouse was filled with a cacophony of voices, accusations, protests, and shouts of disbelief. The officers looked uncertain, their loyalties wavering as the evidence spoke for itself. In that charged moment, Charlotte realized that the confrontation was not merely with the uniformed men before her, but with the entire system that had betrayed its people. The truth was a weapon, and now it was wielded by those who had once been her allies. "Benjamin Edward," Charlotte said, her voice firm yet aching with hurt, "today everything changes. Your confessions and your evidence have exposed a web of deceit that goes far beyond our personal failings. This is not about me. It is about every person who has suffered because of the rot within our system." Her words carried the weight of a lifetime of commitment to justice, and even Captain Harris's hardened expression wavered under the relentless force of truth. For a few suspended seconds, silence reigned in the hall as everyone absorbed the revelations. Then a sudden, fierce determination surged within Charlotte. "I am ready to stand before the people to answer for what I have done in the pursuit of justice," she declared, stepping forward toward the assembled crowd. "But know this, those who have used their power to oppress and to silence must also be held accountable." At that moment, Benjamin's eyes filled with tears as he stepped back, the realization of his own betrayal crushing him. "Charlotte, I never meant to harm you," he cried, voice breaking as he whispered. "I did it all to protect the ones I loved, but I lost my way. Please forgive me." His words, raw and unfiltered, rippled through the hall like a confession of sins too heavy to bear. Charlotte paused, the hurt mingling with her resolve. "Forgiveness is a path to healing, but it does not erase the consequences of actions," she said softly. "We must now let the truth guide us. I will not let this system continue to operate in shadows. It is time for a reckoning." Her declaration was a call to arms, a cry for justice that resonated with everyone present. The sound of approaching sirens and the shuffling of feet signaled that the forces of the old order were mobilizing, desperate to retain their grip on power. But in that moment, the tide had turned. The crowd, once silent and fearful, began to murmur with a growing sense of unity and resolve. Officers who had once followed orders now looked to one another, conflicted by the undeniable evidence laid out before them. In a dramatic, cinematic sweep, the doors of the courthouse swung open, and a group of reform-minded officers, led by a young captain who had long admired Charlotte's unwavering dedication, stormed into the hall. "We cannot stand by while injustice prevails," the young captain declared, his voice ringing clear as he took command of the situation. "It is time to purge the corruption that has poisoned our ranks." The shifting allegiances and the dramatic arrival of these officers catalyzed a turning point. The corrupt officers, now isolated and exposed, began to falter. The evidence of Operation Resolve, coupled with Benjamin's tearful admission and Edward's desperate plea, had set in motion a revolution of truth within the very walls of the institution that had once been Charlotte's sanctuary. As the confrontation reached its fevered pitch, Charlotte felt a cathartic release, a mingling of sorrow, anger, and hope. In that moment, she embraced the full burden of her role. "Today, we reclaim our honor and restore justice," she proclaimed. "No longer will the voices of the oppressed be drowned out by the clamor of corruption. We will build a system that is transparent, compassionate, and true." The courthouse erupted in a mixture of cheers and cries, the air thick with the promise of change. In the midst of this powerful climax, Charlotte's inner turmoil gave way to a resolute clarity. Every betrayal, every painful secret had led to this moment. A moment where the power of truth shone brighter than the darkness of deceit. In the final moments of the confrontation, as the old guards were taken into custody and the first steps toward a new order were being laid, Charlotte stood alone in the vast hall. Her eyes, now steady and determined, scanned the faces of those who had once been divided by mistrust. She saw in them not only the scars of past betrayals, but also the seeds of redemption and hope. With a heavy heart, but an unyielding spirit, she whispered to herself, "Justice is not the absence of pain, but the courage to confront it, to transform it into a force for change." And as the courthouse slowly settled into an uneasy peace, the promise of a brighter future hung in the air. A future where the truth would no longer be hidden behind masks of power, and where every individual could look upon the scales of justice and see them balanced at last. In that final breathtaking moment, as the echoes of confrontation faded into history, the moral of Charlotte's journey became clear. In a world marred by corruption and betrayal, the light of truth, no matter how faint, would always find a way to break through the darkness. As dusk settled over the newly liberated courthouse, the air shimmered with a sense of fragile hope. Charlotte stood on the marble steps outside the building, the events of the day echoing in her mind like a distant, powerful storm now subsiding into a soft, persistent drizzle. The confrontation had been harsh and raw, a reckoning that had unraveled the deep-seated corruption that had plagued their system for far too long. Now, with the corrupted officers detained and reform-minded allies taking charge, a new chapter was unfolding before her eyes. Inside, the grand hall was quieter than it had been during the tumultuous climax. Benjamin and Edward sat side by side at a long table where weary officials now gathered to discuss plans for rebuilding. The atmosphere was heavy with regret and determination alike. Benjamin, his eyes still red from sorrowful confession, looked up as Charlotte entered. The unspoken question hung in the air. Could the pain of betrayal be transformed into a catalyst for genuine change? Charlotte approached the table slowly, each step deliberate, as if measured against the weight of every secret, every mistake that had led them to this pivotal moment. She took a seat at the head, her gaze sweeping over the assembled faces that had once hidden behind masks of power, now revealing genuine remorse and an earnest desire for reform. In that moment, she felt a quiet surge of resolve. The journey of justice was not over, but it had taken a new, purer direction. A meeting ensued, a gathering of hearts and minds united in the pursuit of truth and the rebuilding of an institution that had been tainted by greed and prejudice. Policies were discussed, committees formed, and a task force set to review every case that had been mishandled in the name of authority. Each decision was made with the understanding that accountability was the first step toward healing. In this collaborative spirit, even those who had once erred now dedicated themselves to righting past wrongs. Later that evening, after the meeting had dispersed into the cool embrace of night, Charlotte retreated to a quiet office on the top floor of the courthouse. The room, lined with windows overlooking the darkened city, offered a panoramic view of a metropolis slowly stirring to a new dawn. Alone with her thoughts, she settled into a worn leather chair, the events of the day still playing vividly in her mind. Her eyes wandered to a faded photograph on her desk, a reminder of her early days as a young lawyer, full of passion and naive hope for a just world. Now, having weathered betrayal, deception, and overwhelming moral conflict, she felt both the burden and the beauty of her journey. The photograph represented not only who she had been, but also the potential of who she could become if she allowed forgiveness and understanding to guide her. In that stillness, Charlotte began to reflect on the moral implications of the choices she had made and those made by the people around her. The revelation of Benjamin's betrayal, the agonizing admission of Edward's complicity, and even the brutal efficiency of the corrupt officers. All of these had forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth that the system was not merely built on laws and order, but also on human frailty. Justice, she realized, was not a static ideal, but a living, breathing entity that needed nurturing, even as it was battered by the winds of imperfection. A soft knock on her door broke her reverie. It was Daniel, the young lawyer who had championed many of the reform discussions. He stepped in quietly, his presence a gentle reminder that she was not alone in this fight. "Chief Justice," he said in a low voice, "the community is watching. They're beginning to believe again in the possibility of change." His words, sincere and hopeful, warmed her despite the chill of the night. Charlotte offered him a small, tired smile. "Change is a long road, Daniel. But tonight, I feel we have taken the first step on that path. The corruption we expose today, it may have left deep scars, but it has also laid the foundation for a future where truth and accountability prevail." Her voice was soft, yet carried the weight of countless battles fought in the quiet corridors of justice. Daniel nodded and left her to her thoughts, leaving Charlotte to wrestle with the internal dialogue that had been building over the years. She thought of the faces of those who had suffered under the old order, the silent cries of the oppressed, the broken trust of the community, and felt a renewed commitment to ensure that their voices would never be ignored again. Her mind turned to Benjamin once more. Though his betrayal had shaken her to the core, his willingness to confront his mistakes and share crucial evidence had helped tip the balance toward truth. In that paradoxical way, his actions served as a reminder that even the darkest of human failings could be redeemed through honesty and the courage to face one's own shortcomings. Forgiveness, she mused, was not about excusing errors, but about accepting the messy, complex nature of humanity and working toward a future where every misstep became a lesson in integrity. In the quiet solitude of her office, Charlotte drafted a statement to be shared with the public, a message of accountability, transparency, and the promise of reform. Each word was carefully chosen, echoing the sentiments of a system that was raw but determined to evolve. Today, we stand on the threshold of a new era, she wrote. An era where every injustice is met with the unwavering light of truth, and where the voices of the many drown out the whispers of corruption. We acknowledge our failings, learn from them, and pledge to forge a system that is as humane as it is just. As she read over her words, the enormity of her task settled in. The transformation of an institution was not a single moment of catharsis, but a continuous journey, a series of choices made in the face of adversity, each one a small step toward a more compassionate society. The moral weight of her role pressed upon her, yet it also filled her with a quiet resolve. The system, like the people who served it, was imperfect, but imperfection was not a reason to give up hope. It was a call to strive harder, to never cease in the pursuit of justice. Outside, the night deepened into silence, and the first hints of a new dawn began to light the horizon. Charlotte rose from her chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the city that was now a canvas of possibility. In that reflective moment, she understood that her journey was far from over. The battle against corruption, the struggle for truth and redemption, it was an endless fight. Yet, as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there was always a chance for change. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs with renewed determination. Justice, she whispered softly, is not a destination but a lifelong journey. And though the road is fraught with challenges and the scars of the past may never fully fade, every step forward is a victory for the people, for truth, and for the soul of our nation. In that quiet moment of reflection, Charlotte found a measure of peace amid the chaos. The weight of betrayal and the bitterness of past deceptions mingled with a hopeful resolve to rebuild and heal. She resolved to carry the lessons of this tumultuous day with her, to let them guide her decisions, and to remain a steadfast beacon of integrity in a world too often marred by shadow and deceit. The courthouse, now a symbol of a reborn justice system, seemed to whisper promises of a better future. A future built on the hard-won lessons of pain, forgiveness, and the enduring power of truth. And as the first rays of the new dawn crept over the horizon, Charlotte knew that this was not the end, but merely the beginning of a transformative era, one where every individual's quest for justice would be honored, and every betrayal, no matter how deep, would serve as a stepping stone toward a more compassionate world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.